In 1984, Doctor Who was 21, an absolute eternity for a science fiction series.
We will be guided by you.
The series came back for another season of adventures that would lead to more departures and arrivals than King's Cross Station, and that's despite half of them just being there for the Harry Potter shop.
You're like a deranged child.
Season 21 of Doctor Who.
Doctor, why do you wear a stick of celery in your lapel?
Safety precaution. I'm allergic to certain gases in the praxis range of the spectrum.
Well, how does the celery help?
If the gas is present, the celery turns purple.
After all the backslapping and celebrations of the 20th anniversary year, culminating in the 90-minute special The Five Doctors, it was soon time to get back to the business of making 26 episodes of a science fiction drama.
Where is everyone?
Producer John Nathan Turner, along with his script editor Eric Sayward, had 7 stories lined up that would in turn be ordinary, decent enough, not bad, great, good, absolutely amazing, and finally, what the hell did I just watch? Companions would be written out in quick succession, a new one introduced, and also, while they're at it, let's change the Doctor as well.
And then what do you do?
I eat the celery. If nothing else, I'm sure it's good for my teeth.
Warriors of the Deep launched the season, and it's a show where things didn't go so well during production. An undersea missile base in the late 21st century is having problems with a rookie missile operator feeling performance anxiety. The TARDIS arrives by accident with the need to make repairs, but after exploring for a little while, for whatever reason, the Doctor sets the reactor to overload as a distraction while they return to the time machine.
It'll explode!
Oh, I shouldn't think so. They've got a couple of hours to sort out what I've done.
It turns out the base is being white-anted by saboteurs, but at the same time it's also earmarked for takeover by an alliance of the long-dormant Silurians and their aquatic cousins, the Sea Devils.
Victor, and my companions, Skibus and Tarpok.
How you doing?
Warriors Who Are Asleep by Johnny Byrne was an okay script that for reasons just fell apart during production. I mean, the script was solid, not always brilliant in places, and some of the dialogue is just this side of rank.
Nielsen is an enemy agent.
For the Silurians?
No, our human enemies.
The power block opposed to this sea base.
But it was generally in areas other than purely the script where things didn't gel. Making Warriors of the Deep was like trying to set jelly with a hairdryer. The first wrinkle was that due to an upcoming general election, the story would either have to enter the studios earlier, which would slash valuable pre-production time, or be cancelled altogether. Less time impacted everything, from time for effects to be produced, rehearsal time, and eventually recording time in the studio. Sets were designed in a way to allow them to be repurposed, which saved on scenery budgets, but meant less time for actual recording, and as such, one-size-fits-all generic flood lighting had to be used. Every decision impacted on other areas of production until we ended up with a story that exemplifies Murphy's Law better than Auntie Beryl's hang gliding trip to the Grand Canyon. I mean, we could tell you some stories, but there are some details still subject to the Official Secrets Act. The updated Silurians look good even if they sound like they've been huffing on the kids' balloons.
We are ready to begin, Victor. Good.
Their multi-tool third eye is now merely something that flashes when someone speaks. And they lumber about like someone who's just won a hot dog eating contest and is desperately trying to keep it all down before they reach the bucket. The Sea Devils somehow look worse than their 1972 forebears. Their webbed ears or fins are stuck to their heads while helmets perch precariously on top. In short, they look like sedated border collies, wobbling around and bumping into each other. They're about as menacing as a golden retriever who does not like socks. The overall lack of time comes across in the action scenes, which are woeful, staged as competently as a dance recital for preschoolers. The dialogue scenes are only slightly better, but a lack of adequate rehearsal time shows, and there are several scenes in the final product where all that was recorded was a take that was a rehearsal. Of course, Warriors Oh So Cheap's faults are best exemplified by the Merker. Supposedly a scary attack dog of the Silurians and Sea Devils, it's a costume with 2 experienced pantomime horse puppeteers who'd never seen the costume before, valiantly trying to get through the production. It's one of the series' most infamously bad effects, on par with Erato, the Scarrison, and Adric. Warriors of the Deep guest starred Ian McCulloch, who starred in the BBC science fiction series Survivors, and Ingrid Pitt, who'd done Doctor Who before but was better known from her roles in Hammer horror films. So if you know the behind the scenes story, it's a miracle it got done at all, but of course most viewers will rightfully judge it by what's on screen. And what's there, for the most part, is not good. It's like trying to light the hearth in your rental cottage, but all you've managed to do is set the roof on fire.
Something is coming to our village. Something very wonderful and strange.
The Awakening is a two-part story that was originally written as a four-parter. During the script editing process, it was felt there was not enough plot to fill in the allotted runtime, and so the episodes were heavily rewritten. What we are left with does feel like they just ignored the original scripts for episode 2 and 3 and amended the cover of the script for episode 4 and sent that to the director. The TARDIS lands in an English village called Little Hodgam, so Tegan can visit her grandfather. The villagers are reenacting Civil War battles, but things are being pushed too far, like when the Q-tip comes out the other ear. Time is bleeding through with corporeal projections showing up, such as Will Chandler, a young lad from the 17th century who does display more charisma in this one story than quite a few of the companions we'd had over the previous few years. An alien entity called the Malice is exerting an evil influence over the war games, so calling the entity the Malice is kind of a giveaway. It might have been more subverting of expectations to call him Happy Face, but anywho. Awakening is a story where we get a nice setup in episode 1, and then there's a rush to the end like a marathon runner who really needs to use the facilities at the end of the race so the winner's podium photos don't end up on the wrong websites. Atmosphere it's got, and mostly nice dialogue.
A spaceship from Harkle landed here? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, more likely a computer-controlled reconnaissance vehicle.
How silly of me not to know.
It might feel slightly like a retread of The Demons, but Awakening isn't half as memorable. For a while, this story had a clip that was possibly one of the most viewed clips of Doctor Who in Britain and abroad, thanks to an outtake of a horse demolishing some scenery. I mean, it's worth a titter, I suppose. But it's less funny than the outtake of that other reporter during the Hindenburg disaster.
So I was saying to Mary that if she wanted chips, she should have ordered chips. What's that? I'm on. What did I miss?
Awakening has a good guest cast, a nice score, some atmospheric location work, and the Malice itself works quite well. Guest star Dennis Still had been in Doctor Who before and was also a star of the BBC series Survivors.
It's our heritage.
It's a madness.
Yes.
Polly James from Liverbirds, another sitcom star paired up with Peter Davison.
You must stop him.
Yes, I know.
Some of the staging in the rushed climax is a bit ordinary.
Could fall down at any minute.
And there's an epilogue that oh so conveniently wraps everything up with a neat bow like it's a Christmas hamper from Harrods. Using the BBC Micro to generate particle effects by animating asterisks has not aged all that well. Ultimately, The Awakening is something you're likely to forget by the end of the season. It's in no way terrible, but nothing in it would make you go out of your way to watch it.
We have to get out of here.
There's something very strange going on.
Yes, I know.
Frontios is a weird one, as it starts off well enough with the TARDIS in the far future making a forced landing on the planet Frontios, where the last surviving humans are barely getting by. They're facing daily meteorite bombardments and something weird is happening underground. You think getting your car towed is bad? The Doctor returns to where he thought he left the TARDIS only to discover it's been vaporized. So you might be asking yourself, how did we get here?
What about the colony ship? Must have been brimming with gadgetry.
Oh, systems that could rebuild a civilization for us. Failure-proof technology.
What happened to it all?
It failed.
The Doctor tries to help out, but as is the case in pretty much every story this season, he's treated with suspicion by those he's ultimately going to help.
Oh, marvelous. You're going to kill me. What a finely tuned response to the situation.
The colony's leadership is only just keeping a lid on it, which makes sense when George Dent is in charge and the shouty bloke from the Anedon line shouts a lot. Then about halfway through the story, everything pivots to a tale about dealing with the actual antagonists, a race of giant subterranean woodlice called the Tractators, who are able to manipulate gravity, hence the bombardment of the colony and the disintegration of the TARDIS. The Tractators trigger a race memory in Turlough about the time his bunk bed fell apart after being eaten by Tractators. Meanwhile, Tegan auditions for Gem and the Holograms.
It's no good, is it?
I'm afraid not.
And for a while the serial works. Despite being a completely studio-bound production, there is some half-decent lighting and the tractators almost work. But as we'll see by the end of the season, Doctor Who's hit rate in sticking men in monster suits isn't the best.
Just a touch of spin. How's that?
Doctor Who is never above rating BBC props and costume stores. In Frontios they repurposed the Federation Guard helmets from Blake 7. Frontios was written by former script editor Christopher H. Bidmead, and this one is just lacking in comparison to his earlier stories, which are personal favourites of mine. The production of the story was less fraught than the first two stories, but the show was laced with tragedy with the death of the original set designer as well as the murder of guest artist Peter Arne shortly before recording began.
But as I was saying, you can have Frontios, all the fixtures and fittings appertaining thereunto, and I'll pull my TARDIS together and get off your patch.
I should like to see it. This TARDIS.
As a story, Frontios mostly works until it doesn't. The Doctor manages to form a fake alliance with the leader of the Tractators, the Gravis, even convincing it that Tegan is his android assistant.
I got it cheap because the walk's not quite right. And then there's the accent, of course.
The Doctor challenges the Gravis to reconstitute the TARDIS. In theory, like anti-dandruff shampoo, all of this should work, but sticking some fake rock bits on the TARDIS set to imply it's disintegrated is as low effort as that one time I went bungee jumping but forgot to bring the rope and nobody wanted to go and grab a new one. But I was really champing at the bit to go bungee jumping, and so to cut a long story short, I should be able to walk again in 6 months.
It's not my sort of thing anyway. Mooching around in caves and tunnels underground.
The 20th season was originally meant to end with the Dalek story by Eric Sayward, but industrial action at the BBC saw that story put on hold and was now put into production for the 4th story of this season. Resurrection of the Daleks starts with people massacred by police with machine pistols. Okay. After being caught in a time corridor, the Doctor, Tegan and Turlough land in London's Docklands before it was completely redeveloped.
Don't come in here.
The trio run into Stein, who's clearly a sitcom star playing somebody from the future, and then the crew find an army bomb squad investigating some mysterious canisters. In the future, a rundown prison space station is attacked and boarded by the Daleks, now working with human troops. All in the aid of recovering Davros, creator of the Daleks, also known as Dalek Daddy Davros. The Daleks have, again, rescued Davros to get his help again, this time because they need someone to develop a cure for a virus lethal to Daleks. Davros instead takes the opportunity to build his own army, which in turn leads to a mini Dalek civil war.
You must be exterminated! Exterminated! Exterminated!
The TARDIS crew are separated for most of the story. Turlough wanders into the Daleks' time corridor and ends up with a dramatic actress leading some human survivors trying to blow up their former space station. This being Doctor Who of the 80s, the Doctor is paired off with another former sitcom star.
I serve the Daleks.
While Tegan is stuck with a kids presenter dealing with soldiers who have been duplicated by the Daleks. In fact, most of the people in this are Dalek duplicates, or end up that way. There are these two creepy cops with machine pistols, and then there's the mercenary leading the Daleks' retinue of human troops, Lytton. Why do the Daleks need human troops? Well, they need somebody to run to the top floor to press the down button on the broken lift. Otherwise, thanks to Daleks being impatient, this does tend to happen. Davros's loyal army, led by his assistant Dirty Den, face off against the Daleks, still loyal to the Dalek Supreme, while Davros tries to use the virus against his creations. Until, of course, this happens. What were the odds of that? The Daleks themselves haven't looked this good in a long time, with their voices here being rather unique.
My vision is impaired! I cannot see!
This one sounds like he's a 1930s hypnotist losing his rag when, after an hour of trying on stage, he's failed to hypnotize any of the volunteers from the audience.
You will, in your agony, beg to pay homage to the Daleks!
At one point, the Daleks try to duplicate the Doctor, so they scan him, which is a good excuse to have a bunch of clips showing previous Doctors and companions, even if they forgot Leela. Director Matthew Robinson gave us a very stylish and well-made action serial. There are parallels to the season opener Warriors on $5 a day, which was also a wannabe action thriller with lots of battles, though here they work really well. The plot never stops, with lots and lots of small scenes connecting the various story threads.
So much for the conqueror of the universe.
I told you it had gone.
Production values for the most part did push what was possible with the show's resources, and the show was able to attract a good guest cast with some well-known faces for British viewers: Rula Lenska, Rodney Bewes, Leslie Grantham, Maurice Colburn. Of course, most of them are actually less well-known for non-Brits, but either way it's a good cast. Terry Malloy was the new Davros, and he's a much better Davros than the one from the previous story, but he does tend to go to maximum rant mode too quickly, like a desk fan that has two settings: 1, barely a ripple, and 2, gale force. Maurice Colburn is the Daleks' human subordinate, Lytton, an icy killer, who we would see again next season, but in a completely different light.
Next time, stun lasers are to be used.
It was an unfortunate mistake.
Make it your last, otherwise the next execution squad will be coming for you.
It's Tegan's last story, so after an injury early on, she spends most of the story taking it easy, which unfortunately for Janet Fielding and many other former companions is very good practice for life after being a Doctor Who companion. Resurrection of the Daleks can seem like a blur with lots of very short scenes, and it's easy to write it off as an action-focused mess with little else to redeem it. Some really hate it, I quite like it. This is a story that's had a lot of effort put into it and ends up as being a pretty good piece of entertainment. Not all feel that way, but for me this is a story that you don't necessarily remember as being great, but while watching it, it's very thrilling. Resurrection of the Daleks is another really violent story where almost everybody dies.
This'll be the last thing I ever do.
People are killed by gas or exterminated with some really over-the-top screams, or shot, or zapped, or whatever, yeah. Even the writer Eric Saywood has subsequently said he probably went too far. Like the time I drove to Dover and my car had to be fished out of the English Channel.
You have arrived at your destination, idiot. Would you want me to call a tow truck? Or maybe a fishing boat? Numbnuts.
The futuristic human soldiers on either side have to wear silly caps that make them look like they're about to ask if you want fries with that, or that they just joined G-Force. But the Dalek troops also wear unfortunately shaped mini Dalek helmets. I mean, somebody thought about the design but didn't stop to ask a nearby schoolboy why they were laughing so hard.
I'm not here as your prisoner, Davros, but your executioner.
The Doctor at one stage decides to execute Davros, but of course that doesn't stick. Davison spends much of the story in a double act with likely lad Rodney Bewes, while Turlough probably does more in this story than he has in a while. But he's still a coward, so his main story contribution is pointing out where the exits are. Meanwhile, Tegan has gotten sick of being around so much carnage and decides she's going to stay behind.
If you stop enjoying it, give it up.
Tegan.
It's stopped being fun, Doctor.
It's actually a pretty honest way to have a companion leave the Doctor. She's not fed up or feeling homesick, but actively revulsed by the collateral damage of their lifestyle. Tegan was one of the series' longest-serving companions, and over 3 years had her aunt murdered by the Master, lost her job, her cousin was controlled by Omega, her mind was twice taken over by the Mara, and her grandfather imprisoned by the local magistrate. Meanwhile, Janet Fielding had to wear short skirts in the middle of winter and not look like she was suffering from hypothermia. The initial inspiration for the character had been an idea of John Nathan Turner's, where he had hoped to interest the Australian Broadcasting Company in investing in a co-production with the ultimate goal of filming a few stories in Australia. In the late 1970s, Tom Baker stories were bought and shown over and over by PBS, America's network of public broadcasters that seemed to be mostly funded by a very large tip jar. By the early 1980s, the popularity of the show had exploded over there. John Nathan Turner and many cast and crew on the series would spend a lot of time jetting back and forth as guests of massive conventions in North America. As with Tegan, Nathan Turner felt a companion pretending to be American would make a change from every companion pretending to be from Sussex. Peter Davison's Doctor had started off with 3 companions, now 2, and after the next story would be down to 1. This story would see the series once again travel overseas for location filming, this time to the Spanish archipelago, the Canary Islands, in particular the volcanic island of Lanzarote, which of course is just off the coast of Africa. Okay, enough, we get it. Planet of Fire is a show that began with a long list of must-haves for the story's writer, Peter Grimwade. He had to introduce a new companion for the Doctor, he had to write out his creation Turlough since actor Mark Strickson had decided to move on, he had to write out Kamelion since that didn't work, and he had to write out the Master since Anthony Ainley's contract was expiring, and lastly it had to be filmed on Lanzarote, which had to double for the real island and the alien landscape of the planet Sarn. Kamelion is having an episode while connected to the TARDIS computer. Turlough tries to block a signal which may be from his home planet, now named as Trion. The TARDIS follows the signal to Lanzarote on Earth, where a young American tourist, Peri, is having an argument with her stepfather, Howard, over her determination to go travelling to Morocco with some English guys she just met. Howard maroons her on his boat so she'll miss her flight, since for Peri, it's either her way or Howard's way. Wait, that's the wrong guest star. Peri tries to swim ashore and almost drowns before being rescued by Turlough. The TARDIS follows the trail to the alien world of Sarn, with Peri and what appears to be her stepfather Howard in tow. Well, of course it's him. What were the odds of that?
Who are you?
I am the Master, and you will obey me.
On Sarn, the locals are in a quiver with some unbelievers at odds with the Chief Elder, whose belief in the local fire god is something he tries to instill in his charge, the young ruler of the planet Malkon.
It is the will of the outsider that you all die!
The Master, it turns out, is not having a good day, having shrunken himself by accident and needing the restorative powers of gas produced by the same volcano that's about to wipe out the local population. Turlough, having done more and revealed more, both figuratively and physically in 4 episodes than his previous 9 stories, reveals that the planet's ruler Malkon is probably Turlough's younger brother, since they share the same branding. Turlough's family were exiles from their planet Trion. Planet of Fire is an above average story. There's more than a little running about, but the Lanzarote scenery is very nice. There's a cat and mouse chase between Peri and the Master that does approach a silly level, though there is a reversal that is more than a little playful. Anthony Ainley is in his element as the most mustache-twirling villain the series had. Peter Wingard, Jason King himself, appears as Timonoff, as well as Hammer favourite Barbara Shelley, though some might know her from a more recent role as Dr. Plaxton in Blake 7.
What about Dr. Plaxton?
Boom. Edward Highmore was in lots of things, but he's also the father of Bates Motel and Good Doctor star Freddie Highmore. Of course, if all you can remember about this story is Nicola Bryant in a bikini, then that's understandable. Purpa Gilliam Brown was an American college student studying botany. She's bored out of her mind while on vacation with her rich mother and archaeologist stepdaddy.
So what? I'm Purpa Gilliam Brown and I can shout just as loud as you can.
After getting swept up in the Doctor's adventures, she has a rather real reaction to the craziness. Peri was another companion who didn't meekly accept everything the Doctor said, which would bring out the 5th Doctor's propensity for sarcasm.
Maybe someone wanted some sand to make some glass so they could blow a new vacuum tube for their reticular vector gauge.
Sarcasm is not your strong point, Peri.
Peri was American, though Nicola Bryant was not. She was from Guildford, at last something good coming from Guildford, and at the time her partner was an American actor. During the casting process, Nathan Turner was only looking at people from North America, and so with her agent's collusion she faked an American accent and eventually won the part.
Damn it, Peri.
Though for the next few years, she was saddled with not only playing the part as American, but keeping the accent offset and in interviews. It would be a few years before she came clean to her co-stars. That offset fiction of the accent was drawn out longer than the natural lifespan of the supposed comedy series 2.5 Men.
Well, I'm Peri.
Is that your real accent?
Well, I hope so.
This was Nicola Bryant's first role on television, and once she gets Peri's initial fish-out-of-water reactions out of her system, Peri settles down as a character, helped by the series finally getting over having to have 3 companions. After Planet of Fire, the classic series would stick to 1 companion for the rest of the run. In theory, this should have made writing a story easier, since there was no longer a need to have 3 or more story threads running in parallel. It might also explain why in the stories where the Fifth Doctor was paired up with a former sitcom star, he often had a better rapport than he did with most of his actual companions. Also, whereas Janet Fielding often froze to death wearing miniskirts in winter, we would have some progress in that regard in that Nicola Bryant would freeze to death wearing shorts in the middle of winter. Here, the Master uses the tissue compression eliminator to resize Peri's costumes. Kamelion had been introduced as a companion in the last story of season 20, and even then it looked as though his use would be sporadic. Such was the difficulty in working with the prop that it was almost immediately ignored in subsequent stories.
It's a long story which appears to begin on Xerophas.
One scene would have seen him at least make an appearance in The Awakening, but this was deleted during editing, meaning his second appearance in the show would also be his last. The Master once again gains control of Kamelion. Kamelion came back to be written out. But here, he's not just written out, he begs for the Doctor to destroy him. I swear Peter Davison almost smiles getting rid of Kamelion. Such was the general difficulty in getting it to work in the studio. Even in this final appearance, Kamelion usually appears as either the Master or Peri's stepfather Howard, or if they really disliked the actor playing Howard, they made him wear a suit on Lanzarote and spray painted him silver. Doctor Who was often derided for being cheap and low budget, but many who worked on the show will often talk about an even bigger detriment to the show's quality, a general lack of time available to record the shows. Every cast and crew member has a story about rushing to get a scene done before the electricians turned the power off at 10 o'clock. A flaky prop such as Kamelion would have been a very frustrating experience in the studio.
I'm very sorry, but there isn't time for that.
Like that time we tried to break Auntie Beryl out of the Thai prison that one time, but she was on a winning streak in Russian roulette and didn't want to leave.
I've still got 3 months of my vacation left.
And you want to travel with me?
Is that an invitation?
Actually, it was a question.
Peter Davison had to decide during the making of his second season on the show, season 20, whether he would sign on for a 4th year, season 22. The star had always maintained he would do 3 years in total, and that his experience of making the show during the second year did not make him want to continue past his original plan. However, by the end of this season, he'd express a little regret in quitting after he'd enjoyed much of season 21. Of course, and by this time it was far too late since they were stuffing Colin Baker into Davison's cast-off costumes, and look, it's possible that after being worn by Colin Baker, that the Fifth Doctor's costume might not fit Davison as snugly as before.
Think about it.
Oh, alright, go ahead.
It's gonna take a lot to drag me away from you. There's nothing that 100 men or more could ever do. I bless the rains down in Africa. Gonna take some time to do the things we never had.
This season saw Peter Davison finally find what was unique about his Doctor. By now he was playing the Doctor a little more sarcastic.
Give it enough energy, it will not only destroy him, but everything else. Cheer up.
He was weary and occasionally bad-tempered.
I'm being bullied, coerced, forced against my will. I've had enough for one day.
The Fifth Doctor was a mentor to some space teens, an exile trying to murder him, a shape-shifting robot more under the control of his greatest enemy, and scariest of all, a former flight attendant. A young Doctor with younger companions was watchable enough, but pairing Davison up with an older actor best known for a comedy role really made his Doctor come alive. It's perhaps a shame we never saw that Cyberman story I may have just made up with the Fifth Doctor and Benny Hill teaming up. Or the other imagined episodes where the Doctor and the surviving cast of Dad's Army reform unit to take on the Yeti.
Now please, come and see the TARDIS. As an invasion weapon, it's about as offensive as a chicken volleyball.
Caves of Androzani is quite honestly one of the series' all-time best stories. It's not only written well, but its production values and direction are some of the best seen in the original series. The Doctor and Peri find themselves on the mostly lifeless planet Androzani Minor.
Which reminds me why we came here. And it wasn't to go...
Be careful not to slip.
And while exploring, find themselves under suspicion of being gun runners by the military. The planet is the only source of the miracle substance Spectrox, which can greatly slow down the aging process.
Did you think I was 84?
It sounds a bit batshit, but that's pretty much what it's made out of. Mining of Spectrox is being held up by the shadowy figure Shara's Jek, who with his army of androids is stockpiling the substance that is the most valuable thing in the galaxy. That and a permanent reserved parking spot with your name on it right near the entrance. On Androzani Major, the ruthless and powerful businessman Morgus uses his clout, insisting the military execute the Doctor and Peri. What? No, they're okay. They were rescued by Shara's Jack, at whose lair they meet Major Salatine, who'd been replaced by an android. Jack, it seems, is more than a little weird, but his thirst knows no bounds once he claps eyes on Peri. It would be a running joke just how often Peri would be lusted after by more than a few middle-aged pervs. And not all of them were at home, some of them were on screen. Somewhere along the line, Peri and the Doctor acquire nasty cuts from brushing up against raw Spectrox, which is going to kill both of them. We have a simple plot thread for the Doctor: escape and save Peri by finding the cure for Spectrox toxemia, while a more complex thread involves gunrunners, Morgus's double dealings, and the eventual reveal that he was not only in business with the gunrunners, but had originally been Jack's business partner. All of this takes place on a charming planet with a molten mud core that's a sparrow's pubic hair away from engulfing everyone in a hot mud bath. Caves of Androzani is dazzling in its presentation. Director Graham Harper had only recently become a director, but had worked on the series in various roles such as assistant floor manager and production assistant leading back to the mid-60s. His kinetic style was a break from the often sluggish studio-based action sequences the show was known for, and indeed often derided for.
Well, we just found them.
Sir?
Sir.
But the other superstar here was writer Robert Holmes, returning to the series after several years away. His script has sparkling dialogue and a sense of the grotesque that worked well with Harper's direction. Peter Davison reunites with his sitcom co-star Robert Glenister, and the story has three brilliant villains that make this come alive. Morgus, the businessman pulling the strings, Stotts, the ruthless mercenary, and Shara's Jack, the deranged genius who, after being burned, just wants something pretty to look at. Of course, in every brilliant story, there's often one thing that lets the side down. The magma creature costume isn't particularly great, though at the very least its time on screen is quite limited, and thanks to the show's dark and atmospheric lighting, we don't really get a good look at it.
I need time to think. The execution was a hoax. The General is obtuse, but he's a loyal government servant. He would not have deceived me unless his orders came from a higher authority.
Davison's last story would be his greatest, and possibly it's the greatest story of the 1980s and John Nathan Turner's tenure. And probably one of the top stories, for me at least, of the entire series, old and new.
What do you say, Peri? We can go on nature walks, have picnics, and jolly evenings around the campfire.
Don't mock me, Doctor.
Having recovered the milk of the Queen Bat, the only known cure for Spectrox poisoning, having avoided being shot and buried alive in mud, the Doctor manages to get Peri back to the TARDIS and give her the milk in time, but there's not enough for him. Hallucinating, the Doctor sees his companions urging him to stick around before the Master comes back to stick the boot in.
Die, Doctor!
And just like that, hey presto, a new Doctor.
What's happened?
Change, my dear. And it seems not a moment too soon.
Wow, that was an amazing piece of television. The season started off worryingly with the Warriors of Poundland, hit its stride, and then this story just elevated the whole season from very good to excellent. You can forgive some of the clunkers. What a way for Peter Davison's Doctor to go out. Peter Davison would be one of the few Doctors who managed to have an even bigger career after the series, hardly ever not being in this series or that. He was my Doctor, at least for those 3 years, though if I'm honest, my favourite Doctor is often whoever it is starring in the episode I happen to be watching.
I found that rather insulting.
Rather than end the season with Davison regenerating and seeing only a glimpse of the new Doctor before a 9-month gap, John Nathan Turner elected to give the new Doctor a complete story to establish himself in the mind of the public. The idea had some merit, in theory, so that while the show was off air, it was Colin Baker who people would associate with the role as the current Doctor rather than Davison.
Doctor?
You're expecting someone else? That's 3 eyes in one breath. Makes you sound a rather egotistical young lady.
Also, from a practical point of view, having had so many stories impacted by industrial action, if the last story of the season happened to be lost due to a strike, then at least Peter Davison's swan song would be unaffected. The twin dilemma saw the Doctor grappling with a regeneration that seems to have gone, in technical terms, a little caca. Unlike previous regenerations where things may have been touch and go, this time the new Doctor is a bipolar ball of energy threatening to explode.
You're not serious.
I'm always serious.
You can't go out dressed like that.
At one point he attempts to strangle Peri, and then to atone for his sins decides he should become a hermit.
Receive this weary penitent.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
Romulus and Remus are two genius twins who their father worries about having their enormous brain power used for evil. Professor Edgeworth kidnaps the twins with a view to harnessing their powers for some stellar engineering to benefit the master of Gioconda, the slug-like creature Mestor. The British dental squadron led by Hugo Lang follow but are destroyed by Mestor. Edgeworth turns out to be a former Time Lord Asmael and a drinking buddy of the Doctor's.
What happens if we refuse to help?
While Romulus and Remus, or is that Remus and that's Romulus? No wait, I tell a lie, that's Romulus and that's Remus. I checked in the end credits. For whatever reason, here Edgeworth gives the twins a weather forecast. This is rubbish.
Well, if he really does believe such unimaginable rubbish, he must be faced by some unimaginable disaster, which has unhinged his mind.
It's the end of the season and you've run out of money. Okay, that's a black mark, because if you have less money, you write something that you can do with the budget you have. Here, everything looks like it's done with leftover bits and bobs, sticking feathers on people, sticking random shapes on wall, and then repurposing the glue gun as a weapon. Even then, the script here is even worse. The director couldn't find a pair of identical twins and would have gone with plan B, just casting a boy and a girl who looked vaguely like each other, but at the last moment found these two non-actors. Hang on, what do you mean their names are actually Romulus and Remus? Are you actually sure it's Romulus and Remus? This is a show with dialogue so awful.
And may my bones rot for obeying it.
That it would be out of place as Neighbours fan fiction, and there is some truly ordinary acting throughout. This guy Hugo Lang,
now look, Sergeant.
Lieutenant.
Lieutenant, better known as this guy, manages to find the only shirt in the BBC wardrobe that was uglier than what they had dressed Peri and the Doctor in. Apart from a few half-decent model shots, there's not a lot to admire in this story, and its reception is perhaps made worse by coming directly after a story that I had gushed so much about that I've had to put 4 towels underneath my chair. In this story in particular, Colin Baker's Doctor is played large, over the top in places. He's meant to be manic, he's meant to be arrogant, but it goes beyond that. The Sixth Doctor's been given a costume that's not only off-putting, but in hindsight may have had a more detrimental effect on the series than was first thought. Colin Baker and the Sixth Doctor deserve their own moment in the sun, so we'll talk a lot more about them when we talk about next season. While some of the more ambitious scripts may have come unstuck when faced with the show's resources, this season does have some cracking incidental music. Background scores for The Awakening, Planet of Fire, and Caves of Androzani in particular are some of my personal favourite scores of the entire series. In general, the Doctor defeating some villainous plot would often see people die along the way, but usually far, far, far fewer than would have died had the Doctor not been involved at all. This season saw a number of stories with incredibly high body counts, where most, if not all of the speaking roles outside of the Doctor and companions ended up dead. There had been stories in the past where no one outside of the regular cast survived, Pyramids of Mars or Horror at Fang Rock. But 3 stories in this one season alone seemed like more than a trend.
There should have been another way.
The perceived increase in violence would have a knock-on effect. The ABC in Australia in particular had their scissors ready. They had often cut violent shots out of Doctor Who episodes. Indeed, there are some 60s episodes of the show missing in their entirety, where the only clips available are the bits that the ABC cut. The version of Caves of Androzani, episode 4, that was screened in Australia, apparently edited by Edward Scissorhands, had so many cuts that it depleted the nation's supply of band-aids.
Is this death?
It was so short it almost qualified as an interstitial. Script editor Eric Saywood thought violent actions should have consequences, and they should be shown. Look, I generally agree with that. But the people upstairs at the BBC were choking on their pipes at where they thought Doctor Who was going.
It seems I must mend my ways.
In their eyes, Doctor Who was cheap-looking and violent. Management changes at the BBC would see the people who had absolutely no love for Doctor Who take over several top positions within the corporation. Deleted scenes such as the Daleks showing up in the mind of the Fifth Doctor just before his regeneration just sealed the deal.
Wake me up before you go, leave me like a yo-yo.
The next season would see Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant settle into their roles, but behind-the-scenes drama would begin to overshadow the series itself.
I am the Doctor, whether you like it or not.
And boy, that's a story. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Wake me up before you go, 'cause I'm not planning on going solo. Wake me up before you go. Take me dancing to